everyone, and welcome back to another ASMR storybook reading. Today's story is called The Honest Woodcutter. There was once a woodcutter who lived with his wife and 2 children in a forest far from town. The woodcutter built his home with logs that he cut himself. The house was not big or fancy, but it was warm and dry. The family was not rich, but they were happy and lived comfortably. One morning at breakfast, the family joked about what their lives would be like if they had lots of money. The woodcutter wished for a bigger house. His wife dreamed of eating from fine china plates, and the children imagined playing with all sorts of wonderful toys. After breakfast, the woodcutter grabbed his axe and headed to work. His family waved goodbye to him as he walked deep into the forest. The woodcutter worked in the oldest part of the forest, where the trees were the tallest, thickest, and hardest. But the trees were no problem for the woodcutter. He was the best around. He simply sharpened his trusty old axe and went to work. Soon wood chips flew through the air, and the forest echoed with the sound of the woodcutter's axe chopping. It was like beautiful music. These were days that made the woodcutter the happiest. A little squirrel happened to be nearby, collecting nuts, and heard the noise. The squirrel went to investigate and was amazed by how quickly the woodcutter chopped. She sat on a large pile of logs that the woodcutter had chopped earlier that morning. The woodcutter did not notice that the squirrel was sitting there. "You're the fastest woodcutter I've ever seen," said the squirrel in amazement. The woodcutter thought only about cutting more wood so he could give his family all the things that they wanted. Every day, the trusty woodcutter worked until noon, then took a short break. The woodcutter always wanted to get back to work. The more he worked, the better off his family would be. All of his work made the woodcutter very happy and thirsty. He walked quickly to get a drink. The woodcutter tripped over a rock. When he fell, his axe slipped out of his hands and landed in the river. The woodcutter ran to the edge of the water. He looked into the river to find his axe, but it was gone. Without his axe, the woodcutter could not chop wood, and without wood, he could not buy the things his family wanted. "What am I going to do?" said the woodcutter. Suddenly, the river made a noise. The woodcutter saw the water rising. It grew arms and a head, and it started to talk. "I am the water sprite, a fairy of this river. Why are you so sad?" said the water sprite. The woodcutter told him what had happened. The water sprite said, "Don't worry, I'll find your axe." In an instant, the sprite was gone, and the river began to swirl and foam. After a few moments, the water sprite appeared again This time the sprite smiled and held something in his watery hands. "Is this your axe?" he asked the woodcutter. "I found it in the rocks at the bottom of the river." The woodcutter looked at the axe. Whoever owned it was rich indeed. The axe was made of pure silver. The woodcutter thought about taking it, but it did not belong to him. Saying the axe was his would be wrong. "I cannot take this axe. It is not mine," he said. The water sprite tossed the silver axe on the ground and said, "Very well, I'll look for your axe again." Once again, the sprite left to look for the woodcutter's axe. When he returned, he held an axe that was even more magnificent than the first one. It was made of solid gold. The woodcutter held the gold axe for a moment. This axe could make him very rich. But the woodcutter gave the axe back. "This is a fine axe," he explained, "but this axe is not mine. Someone must be looking for it and misses it." The water sprite said, "Let me look for it once more." When he returned, he held another axe. This axe was not shiny at all, and the handle was worn from use. The woodcutter smiled and said, "Ah, yes, this is my axe. Your axe is not worth much, but your honesty is. The silver and gold axes belong to me. I want you to take them as a gift for telling the truth." The woodcutter was very excited to have all 3 axes. He thanked the water sprite and left the forest early that day. Instead of going straight home, the woodcutter went into town to go shopping. He could not wait to get to the store. He was sure that the store owner would buy the gold and silver axes from him. When the woodcutter arrived, he handed the fine axes to the store owner. The owner looked them over carefully and finally said, "These are the best axes that I have ever seen. I will gladly buy them." The store owner was very generous. He gave the woodcutter a large sack of gold coins. The woodcutter bought an armful of beautiful flowers for his wife. The woodcutter bought fine china plates for his wife, too. He also bought a big bag of toys for his children. The woodcutter had lots of gold left over and carried it all back home. His wife and children were surprised that the woodcutter was home so early. They ran from the house to meet him. When the woodcutter's wife saw the china plates and the flowers, she was so happy that tears came to her eyes. When the children saw the big bag filled with toys, they squealed with joy. The woodcutter told his family all that had happened to him during the day and all about the amazing water sprite. That night, as he and his wife were putting the children to bed, his son looked up at him and asked, "Why did the water sprite give you all 3 axes?" Then the woodcutter's daughter said, "Because you told the truth, right?" "That's right," said the honest woodcutter. Because I told the truth.